Vandaag bij Antwoorden met Bayless Conley.
You know, there's a line of demarcation very clearly drawn by Jesus. John 10:10. Jesus said, "The thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. I came that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly."
Elke dag zit u met zoveel vragen. Iedereen zoekt naar antwoorden. Persoonlijke antwoorden die ons kunnen sterken in ons geloof. Die antwoorden liggen soms voor het grijpen. Bereid u voor op Gods woorden die door de Bijbel tot u spreken. En vind de antwoorden met Bayless Conley.
So we look in Job chapter 1 and verse 1. We're going to read the first 5 verses. It says there was a man in the land of Uz, or the land of Uz and Uz. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Also his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. And his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did regularly, or thus Job did continually or constantly. It tells us Job was blameless. That doesn't mean that he was flawless or faultless. It's the Hebrew word tam, and it literally means complete. Job was complete in the fact that he was walking in all of the knowledge that he had. He was walking in all the light that he had. He was honest to the degree that he had understanding, but he had a very limited knowledge of God. He was upright. The Hebrew word yashar means straight. In other words, he wasn't crooked. He was an honest man, and Job knew that he was honest. He feared God. He turned away from evil. He had 10 kids, and he was greater than all the men in the East. He was very wealthy, and he was very godly. It is possible to be both of those things. His sons, daughters, they were grown. They had their own houses. They weren't little kids. They were accountable themselves as adults. It says every time one of the boys had a birthday, they had parties, and the scripture tells us when the days, plural, of their feasting had run their course. So at least 7 times a year, they had parties that went on for days. And they were feasting and they were drinking at these parties. And it's interesting, even when the servants come, you know, there's only like 2 things they say about the kids. And every time the servants speak, the one thing they say about the kids, they were all partying, they were all drinking. It's one of the big things, one of the outstanding features of their parties, these parties that are lasting for days, is they're doing a lot of drinking. Now, they invited their sisters, but it's interesting. As we read through chapter 1 and chapter 2, we find out that Job was not invited. I wonder why. But the implication is Job was godly. Perhaps his kids were not. So he continually offers sacrifices to appease God, not knowing whether they'd done anything or not. But Job continually is thinking, well, maybe they've cursed God. Now see, he didn't know if they'd done anything or not, but Job knew his kids. But Job continually, he's saying, well, maybe they've cursed God. You know, and the big party that's going on, and there's mostly heathen land around them. Again, realize this is before Moses, before the law, it's before Scripture. So Job, out of fear, is continually offering these sacrifices, and to do anything out of fear is not good. We need to cast our cares on the Lord, and Job continually voiced this fear. Now, quite likely, Job's fear is what opened the door, as we're going to find out as we read in a little bit, what opened the door to the devil. And the lifestyle of his children, more than likely, opened the door to the destruction that they experienced. Even in chapter 2, verse 9, there's only a record of one sentence that Job's wife ever made. Very short, very concise, very crisp. She said, "Curse God and die." She's obviously grieving the loss of her children, but she didn't have the relationship with God that Job had. And then we come to verse 6, and something striking happens. Job 1 and 6, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them." Now, the phrase here, son of God, refers to the angels, and this takes place in heaven. So now we shift from the earth to heaven. And the Hebrew word for Satan literally means adversary. Now the adversary also came among them. God was not Job's adversary. Satan was Job's adversary. My friend, God is not your adversary. The devil is the adversary. And the angels came before God to give an account of what's been going on. And I know somebody says, well, doesn't God already know what's going on? Certainly he does. He knows what you've been doing, but one day you'll have to stand before him and give an account as well. And so the angels are there, and we read in the very next verse, verse 7, "And the Lord said to Satan, 'From where do you come?' Satan answered the Lord and said, 'From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it.'" Now, first it tells me the devil is not omnipresent. He's very limited. Great big God, little bitty devil. And Satan said, "I've been walking to and fro on the earth, walking back and forth." What is he doing when he's walking around? Did you know the New Testament tells us what Satan is doing when he's walking around? You know the verse, 1 Peter 5:8. "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." So when Satan's walking about, his aim is to find someone that's vulnerable, someone that he can devour. So God says, "Where you been?" "I've been walking." We know why he's been walking. He's been looking for someone that he thinks he can devour. And we come to verse 8. "Then the Lord said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him on earth, blameless, upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil.'" Now it kind of looks like God points Job out and says, "Hey, check him out. Why don't you go get him?" But actually the word considered, "Have you considered my servant Job?" It's a compound word in the Hebrew. The first word is set, the second word is heart. Satan comes before his presence. "Well, I've been walking back and forth," and God says, "Oh, you've set your heart on my servant Job. He's upright. He fears me, turns away from evil. He's the one that you set your heart on." God knew exactly why the devil was there. In fact, the next two verses make it quite clear. Verse 9, "So Satan answered the Lord and said, 'Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, around all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land.'" You see, the devil is there because he thinks he's finally found an avenue to attack Job, but he wants to make sure. And the avenue we mentioned would be first through his family, through their lifestyles, but also through Job's fear. Listen to what Job said after all this stuff happened. Job lost family, lost his wealth, lost his health, lost his reputation. This is what he had to say about it. Job 3:25. For the thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. The scripture says in Proverbs 10:24, the fear of the wicked shall come upon him. Now, that is true, but it's true in general. Fear is a magnet for things you don't want. Just like faith brings things you do want, faith brings things you do want, fear brings things that you don't want. Ever since Adam let fear into the garden, it has been a destroyer of mankind ever since. Now, God had put up a hedge, this threefold hedge around Job, but just like Job, just like his family, God has a hedge around us. We can tear the hedge down. In Ecclesiastes chapter 10, it says, whoever breaks down a hedge will be bitten by a serpent. It's exactly what happened to Job. The hedge was down, at least partially, and he's about to be bitten by the serpent. So we come to verse 11. The devil says, but now stretch out your hand, Hebrew word yod. God, stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power, Hebrew word yod. All that he has is in your hand. Only lay not a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So the devil says, hey, stretch out your hand, God. God says, no. But all that he has is in your hand. I'm not going to stretch out my hand against him. Now, said God wouldn't cover it up. The devil's there and asking, hey, isn't there a hedge up? There a hedge around all that he has? Is it there? Is it there? Now, God's not going to lie even to the devil. The devil's trying to get God. Remember we asked the question when we began, is the devil going to trick God or incite God to do something evil? No, God does not do evil. But God doesn't lie even to the devil. He says, no, all that he has is in your hand. Yeah, the hedge is down, but don't touch his life. And so Satan leaves the presence of the Lord, and now we shift again from the heavens to the earth. And we come to verse 13. Now there was a day, this immediately happens when the devil leaves. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing, donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabaeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone am escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the fire of God, a phrase to refer to lightning, fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels, took them away, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Who's responsible for all that? That's the work of the devil's hand, my friend. It wasn't God's hand. It was the devil's hand. And that hedge was broken down. You know, my wife comes from a family of dairy farmers. Her father had a small dairy farm, I think about 50 cows on the farm. Was a small sustenance farm. And one day, lightning struck out in the field. How many of Dad's cows did it kill, babe? 6. like more than 10% of all the livestock he had, killed in a moment. That's devastating when that's how you're taking care of your family. She's one of 9 siblings. And I still remember her talking about how her dad just went out and sat under a tree with 6 of his top producing cows laying dead in the field. Well, friend, God did not send that lightning to kill the cows of Janet's father. And God didn't send the lightning to burn up all the sheep and all the servants of Job. And God didn't send the wind, the hurricane that caused the house to cave in, that killed all 10 of his children. No, it's the devil that's influencing all these raiders and influencing these people to do evil and perverting the forces of nature. I mean, when Jesus would get into a boat to go to the other side, a great storm of wind would arise. And Jesus would say, Father, I don't know why you're doing this, but I submit to it. No, Jesus would rebuke the wind. He wasn't working against his Father. The Father wasn't working against him. He rebuked the wind just like he rebuked evil spirits. He rebuked the wind just like he rebuked sicknesses. There's a line of demarcation very clearly drawn by Jesus. John 10:10. Jesus said, the thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. I came that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. It's pretty clear. And we come to verse 20. Then Job arose. He's just received all this bad news. Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, fell to the ground and worshiped. I'm telling you, we can learn something from Job. You think about this man's integrity. He's walking in all the light that he has. He doesn't understand, and yet he's still worshiping God. Amazing. Now, before the book's done, understanding does come to Job. We read on, verse 21, and he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord is taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. You can't take this statement that Job makes and turn that into New Testament doctrine. Job had a lack of knowledge. He had no scriptural reference point whatsoever. We just read in the story what Job couldn't see. God pulled the curtain back. It was the devil that took away. God gave, but it wasn't God that took away Job's health, that took away Job's family, that took away all of Job's possessions. And then we read in verse 22, in all this Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. Now, I'm going to add this. Job didn't charge God with wrong yet. See, most people have never read past chapter 2 in the book of Job. You will be shocked at some of Job's accusations against God, but the whole thing does turn around. But up to this point, Job has not accused God of wrong, and Job hasn't sinned. Romans 5:13 says, for until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. This was before the law. Job was walking in all the understanding that he had. Yet Romans 5:14 says, even though sin is not imputed, death still reigned all the way from Adam to Moses. Just because Job was ignorant, that didn't make him exempt from an attack of the enemy. The Bible says in the book of Isaiah chapter 5, God said, my people go into captivity because they have no knowledge. Hosea 4:6, God said, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. So a lack of knowledge is not an excuse. The devil will take advantage of anything he can. In 2 Corinthians, Paul urged them, said, look, you need to forgive, because if we don't forgive, we give the adversary an advantage in our life. Unforgiveness gives the devil advantage, and so does a lack of knowledge. He'll take advantage of anything that he can. You know, I had a friend when I first got saved that was a great blessing to me. I was really surprised when I found out his story. He had been a Christian much longer than me and had married the love of his life, and the marriage disintegrated. And he was estranged from his little girl. To him, his whole world had fallen apart, but he had bought in hook, line, and sinker to the idea that God was responsible for all of his troubles, that God was the one afflicting him, that God was responsible for the breakup of his marriage, God was responsible for the estrangement of his daughter, that he couldn't see her, and a whole lot of other things, just one piled on top of another, sort of like Job. You know, he gets the news about one thing. Before that guy's done speaking, here comes somebody else with more bad news. Before he's done speaking, here comes more bad news. That ever happened to you? It's like wave after wave. Well, that's the way it was with him. You know, the marriage breaking up was enough. Him not being able to see his little girl was more. But then something else happened, something else happened, something else happened. And I remember back at that time, as I recall it, Canada was offering free land to anyone that would homestead in the Northwest Territories. You'd go into that wild country and they gave you whatever it was, 7 acres or something like that. And he took off, went to the Northwest Territories up in Canada, built himself a cabin, and lived in utter isolation as a hermit. And he said, Bayless, I was totally into this suffering thing. In the integrity of my heart, I was saying, God, I don't know why you're doing it. I miss my little girl. I don't know why all of these bad things have happened in my life. But God, I'm going to serve you anyway. And he said, I was completely alone. A supply plane would fly in, you know, maybe about 20 miles from where he was once every 2 weeks. And so he'd have to hike out from his cabin, get to this landing strip where the supply plane would be, and get some supplies. That was the only human being that he saw, was the guy that would drop off the supplies twice a month. But he did something, and it's a dangerous thing to do. He began to read his Bible. Everybody say, uh-oh. Began to read his Bible. He read John 10:10. Jesus said, I came that you might have life, that you might have it more abundantly. The thief comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. And he began to read in the book of Job how God pulled back the curtain, and he began to see who was really responsible for things. And he took a hard look and basically asked the question, he said, God, you mean you're not the one afflicting me? This isn't all from your hand? He said it was revolutionary. It changed everything. First of all, it got rid of that deep, dark depression off of his life. He suddenly realized God was for him, not against him. Because honestly, like the lady that I began with the story in the market, if God is doing it to you, how can you pray? I mean, if God has made me sick, and I believe it's God, then it would be an utter act of rebellion for me to go to the doctor. Why would I enlist someone's help to get me out of the will of God? I mean, if it's God's will that I suffer with this, then I shouldn't try and get out of it. I should submit to his will. And it would be rebellion for me to go to the hospital or to the doctor. But I think deep in our hearts, we know God's not our problem. God's not the one that's afflicting. God doesn't do evil. He's not using the devil as his henchman to do his dirty work. And so anyway, completely flipped everything around for my friend. Got rid of his place up there, came back, this was when I was living in Oregon, and got reunited with his daughter, which was awesome. I met him, and he actually poured so much good into my life as a young Christian. He's one of those few people that I can look back and say, man, God used this man to impact my life in a huge way. But it wasn't until things turned around. And I just want to encourage you tonight. Don't blame God for all the bad stuff. He really is good. He really is for you. He's not your enemy. He's not the adversary. He loves you. You know, there's a verse in the New Testament that sort of draws a line of demarcation in the sand. It puts the devil and his works on one side, and it puts Jesus and his works on the other. It's John 10:10. Jesus said, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and to destroy. That is the devil's agenda. If it steals, if it kills, if it destroys, it's the thief, it's the enemy, it's the adversary. But Jesus said, I have come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. If it gives life, it comes from Jesus. The devil takes away, but my friend, Jesus gives. And in this study in the book of Job, and I hope that you join us next time, we are not done yet. We're going to discover some amazing things, especially where God comes on the scene at the end of the story and straightens everybody out. You're not going to want to miss it. And I just want to tell you, you are loved. We'll see you next time.
Heb je een uitzending van Bayless Conley gemist? Op zijn website kun je op elk moment alle preken online terugkijken. Ga naar bayless-conley.nl/mediatheek. Heeft de preek je aan het denken gezet? Dan hebben we voor jou een gratis aanbod op onze website over het onderwerp Ervaar de kracht van God. God wil je dragen als je zwak bent. Hij heeft de kracht en wil je deze kracht elke dag opnieuw geven. Maar hoe kunnen we deze kracht dan ontvangen? Bayless Conley heeft een boekje over dit onderwerp geschreven. Ontdek Gods kracht voor jou. Download het boekje gratis op bayless-conley.nl/kracht en laat God je op zijn schouders tillen.
Wil je de uitzending van vandaag nog een keer bekijken? Ga dan nu naar onze mediatheek. Alle tv-uitzendingen zijn op elk moment voor je beschikbaar. Ga naar bayless-conley.nl/mediatheek.
Bedankt voor het kijken naar Antwoorden met Bayless Conley. Ga naar bayless-conley.nl voor meer informatie en inspiratie.
Ga jij nu door een moeilijke periode en vraag je je af wanneer God zal antwoorden en je uit jouw nood zal helpen? Blijf hoop houden. God zal niet van jouw zijde wijken.
The Bible is filled with stories of people that experience crisis and hard situations, but it's also filled with answers that came from God. It's also filled with stories of God intervening in their lives and helping them, and I believe He wants to help you.
In het boekje Waar is God in moeilijke tijden van Bayless Conley vind je hier meer over. Er zijn 4 praktische stappen in het boek beschreven die je zullen helpen om moeilijke tijden te overwinnen en opnieuw je hoop op God te vestigen. Met een speciale prijs. Bestel online of bel ons.